Audrey Fox adjusted her plain navy jacket as she stood behind the crisp white ticket counter at the entrance of the private ski championship awards ceremony. The night was cold, the kind of biting cold that made one grateful for the warmth inside the Grand Lodge gleaming with polished wood and sparkling chandeliers. Her uniform was modest, practical, nothing like the elegant ski attire and designer coats of the guests milling through the velvet ropes. She kept her gaze lowered, answering rapid-fire questions with soft, measured responses, careful not to draw attention. Most guests barely glanced at her, their faces busy with excitement or distracted by the glint of cameras flashing in the lobby. The rich and famous, wrapped in cashmere scarves and leather gloves, flowed past the counter in a constant stream, speaking quickly in hushed tones about the evening's champions. Audrey noticed a woman in a glittering fox fur turn to her companion and whisper, "Look at the clerk's old jacket. Do you think she knows what's going on here?" The accent that slipped through her words made it clear she saw Audrey as a foreign outsider. Audrey bit back a reply. It was not the first time she'd been underestimated, and tonight was no different. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Guests clustered in groups beneath crystal chandeliers, glasses raised in celebratory toasts. Then, as the announcer's voice rose to reveal the final champion, a sudden, sharp gasp sliced through the murmurs. Heads whipped toward the icy patio just outside the huge glass doors. A young female athlete had collapsed, her face pale and eyes wide with distress. She crumpled to the ground, clutching her chest in desperate need of help. The crowd froze, panic rippling through the once joyous gathering. The initial gasp from the crowd quickly morphed into confused chatter and uneasy murmurs. Everyone seemed to exchange glances, uncertain of how to react. The athlete lay motionless on the icy patio, pale under the bright glow of overhead lamps reflecting off patches of snow, her breathing shallow and uneven. A few guests stepped forward, tentative, unsure whether to intervene or wait for emergency personnel. Yet no one moved decisively. I think someone should call an ambulance," a man in an expensive tuxedo stammered, looking around as if hoping another would take the lead. Security staff, caught off guard by the sudden emergency, hesitated at the edge of the scene. They exchanged nervous looks, clearly unsure whether protocol allowed them to break into the crowd or how to proceed on the icy surface outside. One larger security guard barked a shaky order to the crowd, "Please stand back," but no one was sure who should act next. Panic began to ripple as whispers of heatstroke, heart attack, and worse circled through the guests. The room's warm, festive air shifted into anxious tension. Audrey watched from behind the concessions table, her fingers tightening around the edge. Memories stirred, years ago, an EMT uniform on her back, steady hands in emergencies, a calm voice directing desperate moments. Though she was just the ticket clerk here tonight, years of emergency response training lay dormant beneath her plain exterior. Without hesitation, Audrey stepped forward into the gathering crowd, her voice rising above the chaos. "Everyone, please, clear the area around her. Give her room to breathe." Her tone was calm but firm. A few heads turned and some guests whispered, "Who is this woman?" "The clerk?" A man in a tailored suit smirked and muttered, "Who does she think she is?" Ignoring the skepticism, Audrey knelt beside the collapsed athlete, gently brushing back a stray lock of hair. The woman's chest was rising and falling unevenly. Audrey's hands moved with practiced precision, checking the athlete's pulse on her wrist, then placing a hand lightly on her chest, feeling for steady beats. "Help me find the first aid kit," Audrey instructed a passing waiter, who nodded uncertainly and disappeared quickly. A cluster of guests reluctantly backed away, clearing a circle around the athlete as Audrey's quiet authority seemed to settle over the crowd. "Is there an oxygen tank anywhere nearby?" she called out. No immediate answer came. The event was lavish but not fully equipped to respond immediately to an emergency out on the patio. Audrey didn't waver. She spotted a staff member returning with a small green first aid kit, which she snagged swiftly and unzipped. Inside were bandages, antiseptic wipes, and a compact portable oxygen mask. She wasted no time, positioning the oxygen mask gently over the athlete's mouth and nose, monitoring her breathing carefully. "Someone call 911 again and tell them the exact location," Audrey directed another guest, who immediately took out his phone. The atmosphere changed as the initial shock faded and admiration began to bloom among the watching guests. A woman whispered in awe, "She's saving her." Still, some voices lingered close by, skeptical. "Is she qualified to do that?" a man scoffed, adjusting his designer gloves. "She's just the ticket clerk, not a medic." Audrey met his gaze steadily without responding, her focus unwavering on the patient. "Keep her warm," she said calmly to a nearby event staffer and draped her jacket lightly over the athlete's shivering shoulders. She listened for the athlete's pulse and breaths, speaking softly to her to keep her conscious. Minutes passed, heartbeat racing for everyone except Audrey, whose practiced hands felt for subtle changes. When distant sirens finally wailed through the mountain night, Audrey allowed herself a small breath of relief. She explained the situation rapidly to the arriving paramedics, her voice clear and professional. The professionals swiftly took over, attaching monitors and preparing to transport the athlete safely. The crowd remained quiet, many with wide eyes fixed on Audrey, who stood now with slightly shaking hands but an assured stance. The murmurs were no longer filled with doubt but appreciation, those who had laughed now watching in stunned respect. The same man who had mocked her now nodded quietly, his earlier judgment replaced with awe. "The way she managed everything, it could have been chaos," whispered a woman next to him. Audrey slipped back behind her ticket counter as the athlete was carried away on a stretcher, an unfamiliar feeling blooming inside her chest. The mocking voices had gone silent, replaced by something more like gratitude and wonder. As event organizers redirected the guests back inside, now whispering tales of the clerk who had stepped forward in a moment of crisis, Audrey folded her hands quietly. Her heart pounded, but not just from adrenaline, something else, a flicker of hope, a reminder of who she truly was beneath the plain jacket and quiet demeanor. The quiet strength Audrey showed tonight was no matter of chance. Beneath the plain uniform and unassuming presence was a past shaped by years of rigorous training and demanding service. As the applause and whispers at the ski resort faded into background noise, a series of memories crystallized sharply in Audrey's mind, each flash a breadcrumb of the road that had brought her to this moment. Years ago, the bustling emergency room of a busy urban hospital was Audrey's universe. She pictured herself donning the crisp blue polyester of her EMT uniform, a badge pinned carefully over her heart, her boots laced up and ready to race toward trauma scenes where the thin line between life and death demanded precision and nerve. She moved through crowded ambulances, knife-edged narrow stairwells, and chaotic accident scenes with the quiet confidence of someone who had no time for distractions, only the patient's survival mattered. One wintry night stood out clearly, her hands steady and sure as she stabilized a car crash victim trapped beneath twisted metal on a slushy roadside. Snowflakes mixed with the icy sweat on her brow as she spoke softly to the injured man, promising safety and breath while cutting free the mangled door. The team worked as a seamless unit, and Audrey's voice calmly directed emergency medics with practiced authority. In that moment, her self-doubt never crept in. She was a savior, an expert. It was a role she'd built with years of relentless studying, sleepless shifts, and steady hands. But life's course shifted abruptly when a bad fall during a rescue left her with a lingering knee injury. Days of pain turned into weeks and then months where each step drew searing reminders of the damage invisible beneath the skin. The doctors said her knee was compromised permanently, the kind of injury that barred her from the agile physical demands of frontline emergency work. Audrey remembered the heartbreak of trading her EMT uniform for gray office tasks and then, eventually, simpler jobs far from hospitals or ambulances. The same years revealed the strain at home, her husband losing steady work when his company downsized, their daughter requiring specialized medical care that stretched their finances thin. The vibrant life they had envisioned quietly slipped to the margins, with Audrey taking whatever roles she could handle, prioritizing stability and availability. A scene flickered suddenly, Audrey sitting in a tiny apartment late at night, textbook pages spread out but the light dimmed from exhaustion. She attended occasional first aid refresher courses, determined to keep knowledge alive even as her body protested. A coworker called out cheerfully during one class, not knowing the depth of Audrey's former expertise. Her humility shielded her past like a well-worn secret. Another memory showed Audrey standing apart at an emergency awards ceremony, watching a young EMT receive commendations in the hospital lobby where she once moved with practiced ease. She clapped with genuine warmth, hiding the ache of displacement. Despite the distance from her former life, Audrey never stopped wanting to help, to trust herself, to have agency again beyond menial tasks and overlooked presences. The ticket clerk job at the ski resort was starkly different from the trauma units she once owned, but it provided stability and a routine she could manage. As she stood tonight, watching the snow drift quietly outside the windows of the chalet, the circle of strangers who had ignored or mocked her faded in comparison to the strength churning quietly beneath her calm exterior. The skills she thought long shelved had surged back to life when the fallen athlete needed her most. Audrey clenched her jaw softly. Life hadn't erased who she was. It had simply forced some things underground, waiting for moments that mattered enough to call them back into action. The same steady voice that soothed the athlete's ragged breaths was exactly who she had always been, a woman forged in crisis and quietly relentless in her devotion to saving lives, no matter the uniform she wore today. But that past also carried a whisper of pain and uncertainty. Could Audrey return to that former self fully? Would the world accept her as more than a clerk? The questions lingered, but for now, she held on to the certainty that she had made a difference tonight. The athlete's steady breathing, the silent awe of the crowd, it was a promise that parts of her soul remained vibrant, unbroken. As she'd learned through her years in emergency medicine, presence and poise in exactly the right moments could tip odds between despair and hope. And tonight had been one of those moments. The evening air inside the lodge had shifted since the crisis. Where once there'd been a hum of casual conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses, now there was a quieter, more respectful atmosphere. Guests moved with renewed awareness, many casting discreet glances toward the entrance where Audrey had stood, unexpectedly at the center of the night's tension. Audrey herself felt the change before she consciously noticed it. Her co-workers, once indifferent to her presence, some barely offering cursory nods, now approached her with hesitant smiles and genuine warmth. The concierge, a precise man named Marcus who had typically barely acknowledged her existence, caught her eye and gave a small but sincere nod. "Well done, Audrey," he said quietly before disappearing into the crowd. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. The coach of the collapsed athlete found her soon after, his expression taut with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You saved her life. It could have been so much worse, maybe even a tragedy. We'll never forget what you did." Tears brimmed in his eyes as he lingered for a brief moment, a gesture so genuine it cut through Audrey's usual reserve. She nodded softly, refusing to let the swelling pride show overtly. Their words echoed through the gathering. Slowly, the invisible thread that had separated Audrey from the glittering event guests began to dissolve. Smartphones emerged in pockets everywhere. Several guests had captured parts of the incident, the sudden collapse, the hush that fell, and most importantly, the calm figure who had taken charge. Videos surfaced on social media, shared with quick hashtags praising the ticket clerk who saved a champion's life. The comments streamed in admiration, disbelief, respect. One post called Audrey a quiet hero. Another described her grace under pressure. Her name spread rapidly among local circles. Audrey found herself the focus of curious questions from fellow employees and guests alike. They no longer brushed past her or spoke in clipped tones. Instead, the concierge invited her for a brief conversation about her well-being, noting the demanding nature of the evening. Even the usually distant security guards stopped to ask if she needed assistance or a break. For the first time since starting her job, Audrey felt genuinely seen. Several guests expressed their interest in her background, wanting to understand how the unassuming woman had developed such decisive emergency care skills. She answered cautiously, not eager to delve too deeply but willing to share the bare outlines of her past. Slowly, word spread that Audrey had once been a respected EMT, a life she had left behind due to injury and family obligations. The media, too, took interest. A local news crew arrived the next day, interviewing several guests and staff about the incident. "I was stunned," one reporter said, "that a ticket clerk would have the courage and skill to intervene in such a high-pressure moment." A touching on-camera interview featured the athlete's coach, who spoke, voice choked with emotion. "Without Audrey's quick thinking, the outcome could have been tragic. We owe her our deepest thanks." Audrey watched the footage with a mixture of pride and discomfort. She had never sought public recognition. The attention was unfamiliar, even unsettling. Yet, beneath the unease was a burgeoning sense of validation, that she had once again touched lives in a meaningful way. The online buzz led curious visitors to dig through archives. Articles surfaced highlighting Audrey's earlier career as an EMT, complete with photos of her in uniform, awards she had earned, and commendations from past colleagues. Praise from former supervisors painted a picture of a professional known for competence and composure even in the most harrowing situations. Though the accolades and resurfacing history felt overwhelming at times, Audrey found herself quietly buoyed by the knowledge that the world outside her ticket booth was starting to acknowledge her true worth. At work, her relationship with colleagues shifted fundamentally. A young server named Elise stopped to compliment her on her calm demeanor and quick thinking. "I don't know how you do it," Elise said with admiration. "You really saved a life tonight." Audrey simply smiled, feeling warmth she hadn't expected. No longer invisible, no longer just the quiet clerk standing at the edge, she was becoming a recognized member of the community. Outside the walls of the chalet, the story of her courage spread through the snowy town. Local radio played segments highlighting her intervention. A few of the athletes the next day approached her with shy thanks, gestures that had never before crossed social boundaries at the exclusive event. Yet amid the rising tide of recognition, Audrey remained grounded. The core of her identity wasn't the attention or praise but the knowledge that she had acted when it counted. The gratitude from the athlete's family, the staff support, and even the humbled silence of the guests were reminders that despite years of obscurity, her skills and spirit endured. Near the end of the day, Audrey sat quietly in the staff break room, scrolling through emails and messages opened on her phone. Among routine work mails were notes from strangers, former colleagues, and even a few local officials, all congratulating her and expressing gratitude. For the first time in a long time, Audrey felt a flicker of hope that the faded chapters of her past might not be closed books after all. The path ahead was still uncertain, but the walls she'd built around her past were beginning to crumble. As dusk settled over the mountain, the glow from the windows cast long shadows in the snowy courtyard outside. Audrey stood near the exit, looking out at the silent slopes, thoughts swirling with quiet determination. Tonight, the crowd had turned toward her, not to sneer or ignore, but to recognize and honor the woman who stepped out from the shadows and took charge when it mattered most. It was a moment that could mark a new beginning. Days had passed since the private ski championship awards ceremony, but Audrey Fox found herself still caught in the ripple effects of that one decisive night. Her quiet routine at the ski resort ticket booth had shifted subtly. Friends, colleagues, and even guests offered her nods and kind words she'd never before received. Yet, beneath the surface of this newfound respect, a larger change was quietly taking shape, an opportunity that could alter the course of her life. One chilly morning, as the first light filtered through frosted windows, Audrey received an unexpected phone call. It was a representative from the local emergency medical training center, a crisp voice offering an invitation. They had noticed the buzz around her actions during the championship and the stories spreading online highlighting her past as an EMT. She was being offered a position in an elite paramedic recertification program, an opportunity designed specifically to support experienced professionals re-entering the field. Audrey sat down, heart pounding, breath catching in a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. The invitation was what she had once dreamed of, the chance to reclaim her skills and identity, but it also stirred a deep and uneasy question: was she ready? Years away from frontline work, the physical demands her old injury still whispered about, would she be able to meet the challenge? The doubts clouded her mind, threatening to keep her tethered in the comfort of her current humble role. Yet as the hours passed, a quiet strength surfaced, born from recent days. She thought about the young athlete, fragile on the patio, saved by calm hands. She thought about the coach's tearful thanks and the chorus of voices praising a woman who had refused to remain invisible. At home, her small family gathered around her at dinner. Her husband met her gaze with encouragement, eyes reflecting pride. "You saved a life, Audrey," he reminded gently. "You have the skill, the heart. If anyone can do this, it's you." Her daughter, tugging at her hand, added in her youthful voice, "You're my hero, Mom." Those words, so simple and powerful, began to eclipse the fear. The gratitude they expressed grounded her in the truth she sometimes struggled to see: she was more than a ticket clerk. She was a healer, a protector, and a woman with strength buried deep beneath the quiet surface. Days turned to a week before she finally made the call. Against the cold fingers of doubt, Audrey accepted the invitation to join the recertification program. The relief mingled with nervous excitement, the sensation of opening a door she thought might never push open again. The training center was worlds apart from the cozy ski resort. Bright classrooms buzzed with the energy of professionals sharpening skills and sharing stories. For Audrey, each session felt like stepping back into a familiar rhythm, muscles and mind reacquainting themselves with rigorous drills, decision-making under pressure, and advances in emergency care that had developed during her time away. Tired aches in her knee reminded her of past struggles, but she moved with determination, adapting her approach and embracing support from instructors and fellow trainees. Her quiet competence quickly gained acknowledgement. Classmates looked to her for guidance, sensing the steady confidence born from years of experience. Outside of training, Audrey found herself reflecting on the shift from invisible to indispensable. The hesitation she once felt about claiming her past began to dissolve with every medal learned and every skill refreshed. One late afternoon, after the final practical exam, Audrey stood in the training center's courtyard, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs. She gazed out across the snow-covered landscape with a sense of quiet triumph. A new uniform hung neatly in her locker, not a simple ticket clerk's jacket but one embroidered with paramedic insignia, a symbol not only of her ability but of her resolve. Returning home, she fell into the embrace of her daughter with overwhelming relief. "I did it," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Her daughter hugged her tightly, and for the first time in years, Audrey allowed herself to believe she had stepped fully into who she was meant to be. The community that once overlooked her now knew the truth, that Audrey Fox was a woman whose courage and skill had saved a life and rekindled a purpose too strong to keep hidden. Her story whispered through townsfolk conversations and the corridors of the ski resort, a quietly powerful reminder that strength and heroism often dwell beneath the most unassuming surfaces. And as the sun set beyond the snowy peaks, casting its soft glow across the valley, Audrey looked ahead, no longer afraid or invisible, but ready to face whatever came next with the steady resolve that had carried her through every challenge.